Okay, good evening. Thank you for joining us at Limerick.NET-Azure User Group. I'm delighted to welcome Sarah Lean, ex-Microsoft, current Microsoft MVP, current Octopus Deploy employee, and all-round community big hitter. So we'll hear from Sarah in just a minute. I usually ask people for fun facts that I can deliver, but I forgot to do that. So hopefully Sarah can give us a fun fact when she starts talking to us in a few minutes. Okay. Just another slide here if everybody can see it from our friends at Microsoft Ireland. If you want to follow them on Twitter for information about developer events and general community events on the island of Ireland, and scan the QR code for more information about Azure and Octopus Deploy. And one quick plug for the final, another community event organised by my current employer and another Dutch Azure company, Azure Live, coming up towards the end of April. So Azure Live is created an all-day event, single-day event created by people who love Azure and want to share it with the community. So I'll share some links and details in the chat. There's an opportunity for someone who registers on the link that I post to win some goodie box or goodie bag or something. So I've done my piece for marketing, so thank you for that. I'll post the details in chat shortly. So I'll stop talking now because you're not really here to listen to this accent. You're here to listen to Sarah. So over to you, Sarah. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Carol. Let me just start sharing my slide deck. I'm trying to think of a fun fact. You put me on the spot there about me. My go-to for a fun fact is that I'm a curler. So I've been curling for like 30 odd years. So you'll usually find me on the ice rink, shouting and sweeping and doing all that kind of fun stuff in the winter months, I think. I don't know if that's a fun fact now because I usually tell everybody that. So that's maybe not a fun fact anymore.
Oh, wait, we'll count it. So sounds good.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me tonight. Thank you everybody for sacrificing some of your personal time to come to this event. Do appreciate it. What I'm going to be talking about tonight is Octopus Deploy and Azure DevOps as well. So hopefully lots of interest in that and some things you might already know and some things you don't. So feel free to pop questions in. I might not take them till the end, but do put them in the chat and I'll get to them at some point as well. So yeah, please do post your questions because I'm happy to take them. I always like to introduce myself a little bit because I miss being in person and I'm trying to make that personal connection and having those hallway chats or bumping into you and having a beer with you at the user group. So I like to put up a little bit of a personal slide just to introduce myself for anybody that doesn't know me and plug things like the Glasgow Azure user group. We might be returning to in-person, so it might not be easy for some of you to attend anymore, but we do have a user group over here in Glasgow. So if you're ever across this way, or if you are from Scotland, then please do attend. And please do follow me on Twitter and stuff like that. I love to meet new people, so love to have you follow me and listen to some of my ramblings and random stuff that I talk about, which ranges from farming to Azure to DevOps to just random rants about random things that happen during the day. So do follow me over on Twitter. Now, this is a picture that I like to share because I actually think it's quite relevant to us as IT professionals. So this is a Highland cow, or Heelan cow, as you might hear us pronounce over in Scotland. And as you may or may not know, the Highland cow can live outside all year round because it is basically has the ability to stay outside and deal with the harsh Scottish weather that we have, so it can survive the wind and rain, and it can also keep itself very cool in the summer as well, because it does have two coats, so it's a very adaptable animal. And I think that relates to us as IT engineers, IT professionals, developers, whatever you label yourself as, because we are constantly adapting to new changes in technology, to business needs, to our end user needs. And yeah, we're just constantly adapting, much like the Highland cow. And I think it's a pretty cool picture to share. And if you've never seen a Highland cow before, then you're learning a little bit about Scotland and a bit more about culture as well. So that's the fun stuff over with, or a little bit of the fun stuff about me in Scotland over with. Let's start to talk about some of the technology. So today I'm going to be talking about the Octo Pet Shop. Now, this is a customer or a fictitious customer of ours at Octopus Deploy who are having some challenges with their IT. So they currently have an online shop but it isn't very stable. It's constantly going down, and when they need to make changes, there's downtime and there's no area for them to be able to test any of the changes they want to introduce to their website. And basically they also have a server that sits under the shop somewhere and is constantly getting kicked. It's dirty, it's old, it's needing replaced. So what we're actually going to do tonight and look forward to is actually replacing all of this system for them and trying to give them a bit of an upgrade. Now, in order to do that, we're going to use Azure. No surprise there. As I said, tonight's talk is all about Azure. But we're going to use Azure as the kind of infrastructure platform, as the environment for them to host all of their services. We're also going to use or introduce Azure DevOps to store our code and to build that application. So to build the code out and use that as our build server, or our CI server, as it might be known as well. And then last but not least, we are going to introduce Octopus Deploy as well to complete the package and to help us deploy it out to our environment and just have that whole pipeline going from our source code in Azure DevOps to Octopus Deploy and then into Azure as well. Now, I fully appreciate that most of you will probably know about Azure, but I do love this slide, and it is a little bit old. So for anybody in the audience that doesn't know what Azure is a cloud platform that has a bunch of services that you can use. You can use your standard servers. So we have those Windows servers, we have those Linux servers if you're comfortable with that, or you can start to go a bit cloud native with things like Kubernetes and containers and PaaS services as well. There's a whole host of things that you can use. So there's lots to do within Azure and lots to have fun with. And I don't even think this slide now actually covers half the products that are out there. I think it's missing quite a few of them, but again, it's a good overview of a bit about Azure as well. Now again, Azure DevOps might not be unfamiliar to a lot of you, but again, to cover off for anybody that isn't familiar with it, Azure DevOps provides services to allow you to store your code, to collaborate with others within your source code. You can store your code for your application in there. You can store your infrastructure as code in there as well. You can use it to track your to-do lists, track any bugs. With the Azure boards, we'll be doing a bit of that. Fingers crossed if I remember to do that inside the demo tonight. And there's other things you can do with artifacts and things like that as well. So Azure DevOps is a great tool for a lot of different reasons. And there is a free plan available, so you don't have to invest to be able to take advantage of this. And I've used it in the past for some personal projects as well. So there's lots in this product, but I want to talk to you mostly about Octopus Deploy because, as Carol said, I work for Octopus Deploy. Now, Octopus Deploy has an integration with Azure DevOps, so we can partner with Azure DevOps in some of the work that you've already done if you already have Azure DevOps in your environment, and work together to pull those two pieces of software together to make that integration possible. So what is Octopus Deploy? Now, that's a very good question. I'll be honest, 6 months ago, before I started at Octopus, I was a little unsure about what Octopus Deploy was and what it does. So I've been on a learning journey for the last 6 months. So feel free to ask me any questions. If I don't know the answer, then I'll try and get the answer from one of the team. But I've really loved my journey with Octopus Deploy. In terms of what Octopus Deploy is, at its very simplest, it is a DevOps automation platform. It's your single place for releasing your software, for doing that final part of deploying. So your CI server, your build server, your Azure DevOps server will build your code for you, put it into a package that can be deployed out to your infrastructure. Now, often that could be a simple deployment like we may go through tonight, or it could be a complex deployment where you're starting to look at draining servers or draining services from one service, putting in a load balancer, all sorts of different deployments in terms of what your infrastructure looks like. And Octopus Deploy can simplify that deployment pattern for you. And I'll take you a bit through that later on as well. In terms of what can Octopus interact with, it can pretty much interact with anything. So whether that's maybe your legacy servers, I don't know if we should be calling Windows Server legacy, but if those traditional servers, you know, your Windows servers, your Linux servers that maybe reside on premise, we can interact with them, and we can also interact with your modern architecture. So cloud native, even your virtual machines that live inside your Azure or your AWS environment, we have all of that capability. So we can interact with no matter what type of service you are actually running in your environment. And like I said, we interact with Azure DevOps, but we do have integrations with some of the other major CI servers that you have out there. So GitHub Actions, which is what I've been working on recently as well, Jenkins, JetBrains, there's lots of integrations out there as well. So again, even if you're not using Azure DevOps, we can interact with whatever CI server you have. Now, as I said, that deployment process can be quite cumbersome sometimes when you are deploying out to your environments. And I've seen customers with deployment processes, one for their test environment, one for their QA environment, one for the production environment. And it gets very messy because you're managing maybe 2 or 3 different deployment processes. And each deployment process is different because your environments are different and do different things. And it just gets messy, right? You get to start to the process of you don't know what's happening, and often it will work in tests, but it doesn't work in production, and you're stuck trying to figure all of that out. With a lot of what we can do inside Octopus, we can actually have one deployment process. We can scope certain steps, and we'll show you this in the demo, where if you don't want a step to run or a process to run inside maybe your test environment, then you don't have to have that, but you have one deployment process. So there's only one thing for you to manage, one thing for you to troubleshoot and have a look through as well. We have great supportability if you're starting to do complex deployments with things like rolling deployments or blue-green deployments or canary deployments, or even if you're managing multiple customer environments, Octopus Deploy can support that using the multi-tenancy environments, and we can have all of that again in one space for you so that it can be much more simplified for you from your management point of view. Now, another feature inside Octopus Deploy is our runbooks. Now, I really like the runbook process because that's what I've been using to deploy a lot of my infrastructure as code out. And again, I'll show you a bit of that inside the demo tonight. But it's that great place where you can have things like maintenance tasks. Maybe you have a server that needs a service kicking every 3 a.m. in the middle of the night. You can have that scripted and have that triggering there as well. Or you can start to do things like infrastructure as code with runbooks. Actually, on Tuesday, I was talking to a group of people about using runbooks to deploy your Azure Bicep templates out. So lots of flexibility in terms of what you can do inside Octopus Deploy, whether you're a developer, whether you're a release manager, or whether you're that IT ops person like myself. Now, if we have a look at the CI/CD pipeline that we often hear about in terms of our DevOps process, I want to show you where Octopus actually sits inside of all of that. Now, my design department will probably cringe at my artwork here, but I thought it was pretty cool, and I had a play one night drawing inside PowerShell. So you'll either love or hate my artwork. Maybe it'll give you a laugh. But basically, that CI/CD pipeline looks like this, where you work on your code, your source code, whether that be your software code or whether that be your infrastructure as code. You commit that code from your laptop, your workstation, into a central repository, into that source controlled area where you have all of your code stored. With your Azure DevOps server or any other CI server, whether that be GitHub Actions or Jenkins or the like, it will monitor that source control repository. And once it figures out that something has changed, it will kick into action and maybe build off your pipeline and build off that software into whatever it needs to be. Those artifacts, that zip file or whatever it may be, again, depending on what you are actually packaging up, will get pushed into Octopus, and then Octopus will then deploy it out into your infrastructure, both into your test environment, your production environment, QA environment, whatever that again may look like. But that's really where your CI/CD pipeline is and where Octopus fits inside that. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. Now, I don't want to spend too many slides on you. I actually want to try and show you a demo. So what I'm going to do is switch into some of the code, some of Azure DevOps, Azure and Octopus Deploy. So let's have a look at what this all looks like. So here I have on my local machine the code for my application, so the Octo Pet Shop online store. And this file here I'm demoing is actually my Azure DevOps pipeline. So it's going to take the software from my source controls, from my repository, and start to build it. Now this application is a .NET 6 or 6.1 maybe application, and basically what this pipeline starts to do is take that code and build it through that process that it needs to for .NET. Now I'm not a developer and this is a very new process to me. However, I always think that a lot of the CI part is more of a developer stage. So they'll hopefully tell you what you need to run, what kind of code you need to run. So we've got things like .NET Restore, .NET Build, we've got .NET Test as well for some testing of the application when we're deploying it. Hopefully your developer will tell you that, and everything. This part may differ in terms of what you're doing if you're building a different type of application. We're doing .NET here, so again our code and the steps that we're taking through our pipeline relates to all of that. We then start to publish that application. Again, we're still in .NET territory and building that application out so that it's ready for deployment to our infrastructure. However, if we scroll down, what we're starting to do here now, in this step here, or this task, is install the Octopus CLI command tool, which will help us get what our application into a format that can be deployed through Octopus. In this case, we're taking each of the components. So we have 4 components. We have our database for the pet shop, then we have the front end web app, we have the product service API, and the shopping cart API as well. We pack these up into 4 different zip files, and then we start to push those files into our Octopus environment so that we can deploy it out from Octopus. So basically what our Azure DevOps server does is store the source control, then actually builds out our application. So it does those .NET commands, gets it ready for being able to be used inside Octopus, and pushes that into Octopus for us. So if we flip over into Octopus, here we are. This is my Octopus environment, and I've already started to build out some of this today, so I'm going to walk you through different parts of this. If you've never seen Octopus Deploy before, this is the interface that you'll get. On the top here, you have the menu system that breaks into various different parts and components for you. And then down the left-hand side, you also have a menu system when you're inside the projects area. If we have a look at our infrastructure part, this is one of the first steps that you'll need to do to connect your environment to your cloud provider or your local hosts, no matter what that is. So I've already got my Azure accounts connected under infrastructure and then accounts. So this is basically using an Azure service principal that's connecting and saying that allowing my Octopus environment to create resources, delete resources, modify resources, read resources. That's all done through a service principal. You can connect that up. But like I said, we support AWS and GCP as well, and your local resources as well. So you can connect that infrastructure that you have with Octopus Deploy using infrastructure and then accounts. The second bit that I have set up is my environment. So I have a test environment and I have a production environment. And again, if you have more environments within your own organisation, you'll set up more environments. So if you have to go through test, QA, maybe pre-prod and then production, you would set up what you would have that mirrored depending on what you need inside your environment. Now, in terms of what Azure DevOps did, it actually posted those zip files into my library. Now, I'd already done this ahead of time, but we'll walk through it again in different parts of the demo. So we can see here I have my 4 packages, my 4 zip files that Azure DevOps built for me that are ready to be deployed into my application infrastructure as well. I also have a zip file with all of my bicep files that actually deploy out my infrastructure to the various different to the Azure environment. We also have variable sets here, and this allows us to try and scale what we're deploying and try and be clever with some of our naming conventions and various different things. These are all pre-populated because I don't think anybody wants to sit and watch me typing out variables and no doubt getting them all wrong. But inside my variables, I have different ones for like my resource group, for my Azure location. I have subnets if I was deploying all of that out, and various different things inside here. I have certain ones scoped depending on what I'm doing. You'll also see here that my SQL Server admin password or username, sorry, is hidden, so I can't see that. It's stored as a sensitive variable inside Octopus Deploy. Octopus can read it, it's encrypted and it's hidden, but I can't read it. So if I wanted to troubleshoot that, I wouldn't be able to. I'd have to have referenced it somewhere else, maybe in a password store or a key vault type thing. But here it's stored inside Octopus and Octopus can read it, but I can't as a human being. I've also scoped them here so that my production username is different from my test username. Again, depending on what you need here, you can scope your variables how you need them for different scenarios. Now, if we go inside projects, I have a project called Octo Pet Shop to deploy this pet shop application out to everybody. What I want to firstly show you is one of my runbooks. So here I have a Bicep Create Infrastructure runbook. And this, if we have a look at the process, walks through creating the various different infrastructure that we need to host our Octo Pet Shop application. Now, it's fairly simple in terms of it's only got 5 steps. The first one creates our Azure resource group. Our second one takes our Bicep template and deploys all of that out. And then my 3 steps at the bottom actually start to register those new bits of infrastructure that I've created inside Octopus. So the Octopus knows that it's a target for me to deploy my software to. It just registers basically that infrastructure with Octopus. If we have a look inside here, I'll just show you a little bit of what the steps are doing. There's nothing complicated in terms of what we're actually doing. To create the resource group, we're actually just using an Azure command line tool or command that says create this user group. Basically, AZ group create and then the location, which is a parameter that we're calling from our variable library, and then we have the name of the resource group, again building on that from our variable sets that we have. And again, that deploy Bicep template here is doing a little bit more PowerShell commands, but basically what it's saying is take that zip file that you have with all of your Bicep files, extract it so that I can start to use it. We then create a deployment name based on today's date, and then we issue the PowerShell command that will action those Bicep templates. It is quite a long PowerShell command. I probably should have broke it up into several lines, but it's basically just telling the system to deploy it with all of the input I need for my SQL Server database, my Azure web apps, my username and password for the SQL Server database. All of those kind of things are happening inside that step there. The other steps in terms of registering the infrastructure, this is a pre-bit of built of code that you can grab from our documentation, but it basically just finds that new resource that you've deployed inside Azure and registers it inside Octopus so that, again, like I said, it can see it as a deployment target and knows that it'll be available for it to deploy your software code out to. Now, I've already run this for my test environment because it does take about 5 or 6 minutes or sometimes 10. I've seen it do it to deploy it, so I don't want you all to have to wait here. But if I wanted to trigger this for production, I would click on Run. I would select my environment, so click Production, and it will run away and it will do that. So hopefully in the background, as I'm showing you other bits and pieces, this will start to deploy that Bicep template for our production environment. Now, next thing that we want to do is actually start to deploy our software out to our infrastructure. So we want to try and build up this deployment process that takes that source code for the application and deploy it out to our target infrastructure. Now, as you can see, I've built up some steps here already, so I want to take you through what those steps are. The first one is to deploy to our database. So if we drill into this, you can see here I am actually targeting a server called Bastion. So when we're deploying to SQL databases, we always say you don't deploy directly to the target. You use a bastion box or a jump box to interact with that SQL server. Again, it's best practices. It's just taking the database, which is often your sensitive material, which is often the thing that you value most inside your environment, because it has all your maybe customer data, etc. Away, just one step away from Octopus in case anything malicious or something happens. Fingers crossed, touch wood, that doesn't happen. But again, best practice, we say to use a jump box to actually use between your Octopus server and your SQL servers or your database server. What this step does is actually takes that zip file that's called octopetshop.database, and it'll just deploy it out to that database server. So it'll extract it, it will put it onto the SQL Server database. It's been a long time since I actually imported data manually into a SQL Server database, but it does all those commands to import that data and set out that configuration that you need for your database. These next three steps, I take again another package and deploy it to our Azure web app this time. So because this is more, what we say, cattle versus pets, if we think about that analogy, and we can interact directly from our Octopus server to that Azure web app. So we're targeting and we're saying, find the server that's labelled as our product service server and deploy this application out to it. So we're saying take that product service.zip file and apply that out to our web app. Now, if you're familiar with .NET applications, you'll know that there is a, let me find the right bit. There we go, the last one I clicked on. There's an appsetting.json file inside your .NET application that you can use to try and control various different things inside your application. So you can maybe say the environment that you're deploying it to, and we'll show that inside our application. You could have the version number of the application deployed somewhere on the bottom. You could be controlling your copyright data on your website. This file, that appsettings.json file, can help you change what's happening inside your application with, again, other variables. As I said, I'm not a .NET developer, so I'm maybe not explaining this to the best of ability, but this allows us to change some things inside our application, and I'll be showing you that once we actually get to deploying that application. Those three steps do the exact same thing. They all deploy out a package to our Azure web app. What the eagle-eyed among you might notice is that we have these little parallel bars in between each of these steps. And that means that those three steps can actually run all together. We say that we want to deploy our database separately because it's a database and we want to make sure that it's already set up before our Azure Web Apps connect to it. But with our Azure Web Apps, we can run all of these deployment steps in parallel at the same time, and it doesn't affect what happens at the end result. Obviously, you don't maybe want to run too many things at once because that will put an overburden on your deployment step, and it may actually directly impact your outcome at the end of it. But I've tested this a few times and I know that I can run these quite happily on their own. It's not overburdensome and I get the result, fingers crossed, at the end of it all once it's carried out, absolutely fine. What I want to start to do though is kind of build this up a little because there are a few steps that we want to add in addition to what we already have here. So one of the first steps I want to do is what we call a manual intervention step. Now what a manual intervention step does is basically put a stop or a hold on the deployment process so that, say you're deploying to production, you might want an additional manual check for someone to say, I'm absolutely okay to deploy out to production. However, I want someone to double check it and make sure that it's the right deployment and we've got the change control approved or whatever it may be, or something has been communicated out to end users. This is maybe overkill for your test environments because test environments should be test. You should be happy to break them and no one really is worried about them. But again, for production, we want to introduce this manual intervention step. So if we scroll down, we have to put in, first of all, instructions. So basically instructions for the person that would be carrying out the manual override. We'll just put in, are you okay, if I can spell. obviously you put in some real life instructions or questions there for the people to have a check at. The next one is to check about responsible teams. So who can override this manual intervention step? Again, you would scope this in real world to either a person or a couple of people, your release managers, maybe some managers inside your department. Because it's only me tonight, I'm going to do everyone. And again, this isn't best practice. Definitely don't do this in the real world. But once we scroll down, we want to then specify that this only happens inside our production environments. Again, we're scoping this step to only happen when we deploy out to production. We don't want this to happen for any other environments out there. So we click on Save. But what you'll notice is it's added that step at the bottom of my process. So if I was to run this now, it would deploy out to everything, and then it would actually ask me if I was okay to run this and ask me to check if it was okay to complete the process, which is absolutely no use. So what we want to do is reorder this step, and we click on the little ellipse here and click reorder steps, and we drag it up to the top. So if I ran this now, the manual intervention would kick in, and then if I said it was okay to run that, it would then continue on with the other steps. I want to add in two more steps into this process. So I have noticed when we're deploying out to test, sometimes if we do multiple deployments out to test back to back, what we end up doing is locking up our Azure web apps, and we basically need to give them a quick kick to actually accept new changes. So what I want to do is run an Azure script. So I'll click on Azure and then click on Run an Azure script. So I'm going to call this Restart Web App. Now this step here is what I want to change. I want to change the worker pool. So if we think about worker pools in terms of Azure DevOps, they're agent pools, or if we're thinking about GitHub Actions, they're runners, I believe GitHub calls them. Basically, it's another machine that sits out there with a bunch of tools installed, and it's able to actually execute some of my commands and take some of the load and spread that load if you're doing lots and lots of deployments here. So I've got a Windows server sitting inside my Windows worker pool with all of my Azure's tooling installed, my bicep tools, all that kind of stuff that can help me with some of these deployment steps. So I'm picking on the Windows worker pool. I then say which Azure subscription I'm using. So if we click on Azure account name, and then inside the source control, what I want to add in is 3 lines of small code that will actually just restart my web app. So rather than me going into the portal and restarting it, this will kick off a restart for all of my 3 web apps. Again, I'm using parameters and variables pulled in from my variable library set. I don't want this to happen in production, so again, I'm going to scope this for just the test environment and click Save. But again, this is in the completely wrong place, so I'm going to reorder it again and put this at the start. The last step I want to add in is doing a notification to teams. So we want to notify people or the team when a deployment is actually happening. So we'll leave the step name as Microsoft Teams post a message. We'll click on Run Once on a worker. So we want this to run on a worker. Again, that Windows worker machine will do this for me. I will put in the webhook that you need to be able to post messages to my Teams channel. And you can see we've already pre-built in some kind of message. So we're basically taking some built-in variables from Octopus saying that the project name, the release number has been deployed to, and then different parts of what's happening. Again, that's building up the message. You could completely overwrite that if you wanted and have it a bit more personalized. I'm going to be leaving that here as the default message. Now, that's me built it up, and I've now got 7 steps. I've got various different steps that will be scoped depending on what environment I'm running on them. But basically, we have those 7 steps that will run during our process. So let's kick off a release to our environment. So we click on Create Release and click on Save. this will start to deploy out to our test environment. And you can see because of the life cycle we have set up, it has to deploy to test first and then production. We can't just skip straight ahead to production. Now you could have that configured for your life cycle. Again, that's something that maybe isn't best practice. We don't want to always be able to just deploy to production environment. So let's kick off deploy to test. I could schedule this. I could say later on, I could say run this at 3 AM in the morning. But again, let's run this right now and have it running in the background. So this takes a few seconds to run, or a few minutes to run and actually deploy out to us. I'm going to take a small breather. Is there any questions while I'm waiting on this to kickstart?
I have a few, but if anybody wants to come off mute and ask some questions of Sarah, I'm happy to let you go first. No? Okay. Can I ask one of my questions then?
Yeah.
So you mentioned secret. Actually, I have like 6 questions, but they can wait. I'm just curious. So, see, when we were talking secrets earlier with variable management and stuff like that, is there any way to integrate the variables with like Key Vault, so you can do a Key Vault reference for secrets and stuff?
Yes, you can.
Oh,
that's
excellent.
A feature that has. I think that feature actually launched just after I started, Carol, but yes, you can actually pull them in from Azure Key Vault, and I believe the equivalent to an AWS. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I was trying to think widely what that was called, but yeah, we'll go with Key Vault.
Yeah, you can definitely integrate with Key Vault.
Well, that's excellent. Thank you.
Anything else?
Yeah.
It's still running, so you've got time.
Oh, change screen, so it's still going. Okay. So is it so you know the way in GitHub Actions and in Azure DevOps you can write this stuff, these pipeline definitions and stuff in YAML? Is there an equivalent for Octopus Deploy for writing it as code, and so you can store the definitions in source control, or? Yes.
So again, another feature that's currently in private preview is called config as code. So your deployments can actually be stored inside something like GitHub as I can't remember what the extension file is. I think it's .ocl. We've created.
Is that a custom language then, like an Octopus specific DSL type thing, or?
Yes and no. I believe it's built off the back of, and don't quote me here, Pulumi. I think it's very similar.
Funny, I've been doing a lot of talking on Twitter the last few days about infrastructure as code languages, and Pulumi, I didn't even think about Pulumi when I was putting the poll up, but it's been getting a lot of love from developers, so I must check that out. Yeah, I think we've taken, and again, don't quote me because I'm probably getting it wrong given it's nearly 9 PM for me, but it is a kind of custom language, but it's built on top of or very similar to something else out there. Okay, cool.
And we do have an authoring pack inside Visual Studio Code where you can have syntax variations and stuff like that. So although it's kind of custom, we have built on other things, and we can do that with the processes. We are getting hopefully to the stage where that config as code is going to come out into GA, and then going forward in the year, we're going to be doing config as code for runbooks as well, so you can actually source control that as well, because the amount of changes I make would be horrendous in a production environment to get things working.
Yeah, I know a lot of companies like to store their definitions for pipelines and runbooks and stuff like that as code, so they can store it in with their bicep or with their applications or in its own repo, depending on what way you want to run that. That's awesome. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. Well, we've managed to run this. So basically, this is showing us, if we show you the task summary screen, everything's a tick. So that's fantastic. That means it's good to go. If we have a look inside the task log, we can drill into more detail. So if this had failed, we can have a look at really verbose logging, and you can get into quite detailed things about what it's run. Like even here, there's a PowerShell command that was run onside that worker. You could see if it was the wrong version of PowerShell, because we've got PowerShell and PowerShell Core nowadays and all those kind of fun stuff that add in. But basically, if we scroll down, what we'll get at the very bottom here is the website for our front page. Now, this is that Azure web app, and I was going to say it takes forever to load, but it hasn't. So here we can see we've got that Octo Pet Shop, and we can see some of the variables. So if you notice, my release number inside Octopus was 002. That's showing us up here because we've used that app settings.json file inside our .NET application to pull in some information about what's happening. So we've got that version, and we've got the test environment again. So your testers can be able to make sure that they're using the test environment and not hammering your production environment for various different things. So that's the deployment process run inside test, but there's some things that I do want to change slightly about what we actually do here. So if I head over, let me switch over to my Visual Studio Code again. One of the things I want to be able to do is when I'm actually seeing my release inside Octopus, I want to be able to see some of the commit messages. So if I've changed the source code and I've done that because I've had a task inside my Azure DevOps board, I want to be able to take all that commit message and actually show it inside Octopus as well. So what I'm going to do is slightly change my Azure pipeline. So I'm going to add in a step that creates a release inside Octopus Deploy. So instead of me manually triggering that release, it will automatically trigger a release as it's building the pipeline, and also pull in my comments, my commit message from my source code as well. So if we add that on to my pipeline, and again, if you love YAML, you'll love this, but I'm copying and pasting it rather than actually writing it out by hand. The other change I want to change is, if you noticed on the date on my website, it said 2020. So I want to change that date to 2022. So hopefully you'll be able to see these changes happening. So I think on my Azure DevOps board, that is issue number 20. So in my commit message, I'm going to say changing pipeline date, and then I'm going to do #20, which should reference my Azure DevOps issue if I remembered the number right. So I will sync those changes up and I'll push them into my Azure DevOps environment. So hopefully this all works fairly quickly for us tonight, but we shall see. If we head over to this pipeline, let's see if it's actually updated dead quick. Yes, so it's accepted the change. We can see here's my commit message, and again, let's see how quick Azure DevOps is actually going to build for me tonight. This again usually takes 2 or 3 minutes, assuming I get an agent through the pool quite quickly. Oh, it's starting. That's a good sign. Again, Carol, have you got any more questions? You said you had hundreds, so
hundreds. We'll go for 6. Feel free to interrupt me, anybody in the chat there, if you want to ask questions. But I'm curious about this stuff, so I thought I'd ask. So, I'm a bit of an Azure nerd. Is probably an understatement. So, where is Octopus Deploy hosted? Is it cloud hosted? Do you run your own? Is there 2 options for, so the interface you're logging into, is that hosted in a cloud somewhere, or?
Yep. So you can host it yourself. So you can get the MSI file, install on a container. You can install on a Windows server, Linux server. I think you can host your own, do that whatever you wanted to do. But we also have a cloud environment. The version I'm using tonight is the cloud environment, because it, guess what, runs inside Azure. We host.
That's what I was about to ask. What cloud's it running in? No.
I believe we used to actually host all of our cloud instances in AWS, but we actually moved to Azure. And I believe, again, might be giving away too many secrets here, but I think we actually architected it inside Azure to save money. To be honest, that's why we moved. And I think we're actually doing a case study with Microsoft about that journey from AWS and how we're using it inside Azure. But yeah, the cloud version all runs inside Azure. So you have that option either to do cloud, or you can do self-hosted and host it however you need it and however you want it.
Does that mean if you're using, I seen the option for hosted and self-hosted worker nodes, does that mean the hosted worker nodes are running in Azure too then?
Yes, so whether you, even if you're using the cloud version, if you use the hosted worker, the hosted workers are inside Azure. They get spun
Awesome.
up very much just like what we've just seen with this agent pool here in DevOps. So it could be quite quick, like we've just seen with DevOps, and sometimes it can take a little bit longer. But again, that's just because you're using those cloud ones, and it takes a minute for all of that to spin up. So yeah, it's the exact same in terms of that, if that makes sense.
That's really cool. Thank you.
Awesome. This is firing through the long bit, so it's getting there. You can see it's building through all of those steps, and it's getting to pushing my zip files to my Octopus server. And the very last one should help us create a release. So when we flip over to Octopus, we should have release 0.0.3, and it should have my commit message and more information. Let's see if it does. This is the test. So that's it finished. So let's switch over. And yay, it's worked. So you can see here, I've got 0.0.3. I didn't create that. And if we have a look at our release notes, we've got all of that information from Azure DevOps. And again, here's my, because I put in that like #20, it should pick up my issue inside Azure DevOps, which was change the date. No, it wasn't. I picked the wrong task. But you can see in principle what I was trying to do there. You can link that together so that, again, you can see what's happening inside your release versus if you're using Azure DevOps for your board and tracking all of your issues, your bugs, things like that. So you could even have that trigger so that if you kick off a release, you can actually automatically release that release to test if you wanted to. So you could have that whole process automated. So if you were a developer or infrastructure person, you push your code into your source control repo, Azure DevOps builds all of that code for you, creates a release inside Octopus, and actually releases that out to you. So you can get instant feedback that will allow you to maybe go and get a coffee and not have to press anything for a few minutes. So yeah, you can have all of that working out there. So what we'll do is we will actually release this one out to test and click on test again. Hopefully it'll be fairly quick. And then I can show you what happens to the manual interventions when we actually do that out to production, because I think that's the one step I haven't showed you the process of. You can actually roll back. So say you rolled out like 0.3, you can then go back to 0.0.1 and redeploy to test. So you can roll back quite quickly. Again, if you wanted to, you probably don't want to roll back your test environment. You probably just scratch it all and start again. But if that was a production one, you do have that ability to redeploy out to it. If I pick on the overview screen here, you get a good idea of where your environments are as well. You can see we just rolled out 0.0.2 to test, and then we didn't do it to production. We could roll it out to production if we wanted right now. Well, that one's working, and you can see we can't deploy to production yet until test has been happened. Again, you can trigger your life cycle to be different. Again, you can maybe want to override it in an emergency change. You can have that ability to change all of that as well. Let's have a look. It's going to take a few seconds to actually run. What I'll show you here is actually quite cool. The audit log under configuration and audit, you've got a track of everything that's been happening inside your environment. So again, if you have an auditor on site, or if something goes wrong and you maybe want to point the blame at someone as to why they've done that, or just understand when something happened, or check if that job that you scheduled for 3 AM in the morning actually did, you can have a look here at all of this audit log. You can see here I've done tons of things to change the deployment process, which you saw me do earlier on. If we were to scroll back, you'd see all the test runs I did this afternoon to make sure that this demo worked, and all of that's there for you. Even if I was to delete that deployment process and wipe that completely from the system, the audit log still has it, so you have that traceability. I think it goes back about 30 days, or you can extend that or more, depending on, again, how much you want to store for your logs and how much you may need to be able to do. But you have that ability there as well. So there's lots of things you can actually do. So let's have a look. Still deploying out to the service. It's nearly there. So let's give it a few minutes. Is there any questions while we're waiting on that one to run? Have I answered all your questions so far, Carol?
I think I had a question about whether there was a command line interface for it, but I've decided not to ask it. The only other real question I have is about licensing and what it costs to use this stuff. But maybe you're not there yet in your presentation. But
yeah, we do have a set license price again, and it will kind of depend on all the infrastructure that you're deploying out to how many deployment targets. It can get quite complicated when you're starting to deploy out to Kubernetes and containers, and then how many deployment targets you're going to. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head. Any of the sales conversations so far, but yeah, we have a set price. It's very much it's not fluid. We don't change it depending on whether you're a small company versus a very big company and have lots of money for us. It's a set price, and that's one of the things that I think the team have always been like hard on or driven towards, that the price is the price, basically. So yeah, the command line one, yes, we do have a command line. Oh. We do have a command line. We do have an API. I actually did a cool thing with the API where I wrote a PowerShell script to query the API, and then I can trigger that PowerShell script with my Elgato Stream Deck, and I felt dead proud of myself when I did all of that. So there's fun stuff you can do.
So there's a few things that we've been doing with work where we're using things like functions to poke or trigger a pipeline. Using the pipeline ID, so triggering it through the API. So it's good that Octopus Deploy can do that too, because it means we can then programmatically build something that then goes and pokes that and pushes it or kicks it or whatever it needs to do to it. You know, that's awesome.
What I'll do here is just kick this deployment to production off, so as I can show you what happens when we actually kick in the manual intervention here. You see it skipped that restart the web apps, and now it's actually triggering the manual intervention is required. Again, you'd be able to see the notes. You can assign this to yourself. Hopefully you would have a release manager that would be able to do this for you. I'm going to assign it to myself, and I'm going to say proceed. You could obviously abort it if you didn't want, if it was an accidental push to production and you didn't want to, and then you hit proceed. And then basically that just gives you that extra manual step to check if you wanted to deploy out to production. And it'll do the exact same thing as we did with test. It'll deploy out to the application and run it all. If I just pull up the test one, I'll hopefully show you that the date has changed to 2022. There you go. It has changed to 2022. So I wasn't just typing in stuff and nothing happened. But yeah, that should be the kind of end-to-end process. I think I've got a few more slides if I just sum this all up for you, because we have done quite a bit and I have talked quite a bit. What I did for Octopet Shop was introduce new infrastructure hosted inside Azure. I deployed that out using bicep templates. I also introduced a test environment for them. I introduced source control using Azure DevOps repo for all of the source control, the source code. And then we introduced that CI/CD pipeline using Azure DevOps and Octopus Deploy. And hopefully at the end of all of that, we've got much more stable, repeatable and cost-effective solution for the Octopet Shop team as well. Now, I have spoke lots, and I'm sure you've, well, maybe you don't have any questions because I have answered quite a few of them. But if you want to go off and do some additional reading, maybe even get a copy of some of the source code that I've done tonight, or a copy of my slide deck, please head over to the URL on screen and you can grab all of that. And again, if there's any other questions, happy to take them or reach out to me on Twitter, because I'm always about as well, folks. So yeah,